Hi class, and welcome to this video on VCE Year 12 Economics, which is going to cover the topics of market failure and government intervention, which are key topics in Unit 3 Outcome 1. In particular, they are the key knowledge points 14 and 15. What do I hope that you get out of this video, which is going to be a long one, so it might even be one that you split up. We're going to look at what a market failure is and the reasons for them. And there is actually 4 ways that we would consider a market failure to occur: public good, externalities, asymmetric information, and common access resources. And then we're going to think about what are some of the government interventions that a government might implement to try to fix or address market failures. And these can include things like indirect taxation, subsidies, government regulation, and government advertising. And we're going to look at some of those ones. So it's going to be quite a long video. We're getting to the end of Unit 3 Outcome 1. You can see we are doing the 14th and 15th key knowledge points. And there will again be the assumption that videos above, you understand the key knowledge points above because you've watched the videos or done that study. So what do we mean by a market failure? We haven't talked about this yet. Previously, we've been talking about perfect markets, price mechanisms, efficient allocation of resources. A market failure is a situation where the price mechanism, supply and demand, price equilibriums, has not delivered the most desirable or efficient outcome. Market failures occur because the allocation of resources that has been determined is inefficient. And because it is inefficient, this has led to your living standards of the citizens not being maximised. This is because there has been an over-allocation to production of goods or services, or an under-allocation of other goods or services. So we're not allocating our resources in the most efficient way to produce the goods or services we need. This means that the market is in equilibrium but the quantity traded, so the amount that we are making of each goods or service, is not what we should be doing to maximize our living standards. It's likely to mean some of the following: that the right combination of goods and service is not being produced. So our composition of what we're making is not the most effective way to direct our resources. People are purchasing goods and services that are not maximizing their well-being. So the goods and services being purchased are not maximizing their well-being. We are not employing the most efficient production techniques. And the allocation of resources may be impacting the way that we create sustainable development. So we might not be looking after future generations. It could also be a market failure because it would be possible to achieve higher standards of living, a few little typos, apologies, without making someone worse off. So we could actually do something that would improve living standards of someone without at the expense of someone else. So we're not being efficient. So what do we mean by market failure and market structure? We're not talking too much about different market structures, but it's important to understand them briefly. We understand that inefficient outcomes or market failures are more likely to occur in non-perfect markets. They are more likely to occur in monopolistic or highly concentrated markets, maybe like a monopoly. This is because in industries where monopolies or oligopolies or monopolistic structures occur, there is an incentive to restrict supply as to drive prices up, and this will result in those businesses making more profit but not having the most efficient, effective outcome for the economy as a whole. And this is because of a lack of competition, a lack of ease of entry and exit, and it can result in a reduced incentive to create productivity or increase productivity. This is where we can have collusion, predatory prices, limit of competition, and hence driving up prices unfairly. And this is often always due to high barriers of entry. I've skimmed this slide briefly because if you are interested, by all means have a look at it, but what I really want to get into is the bit that is the focus of our study design. And before we do that, we need to understand this concept of an externality. To understand market failures, we must understand externalities. And this is a type of market failure itself, but it covers so much of the other market failures as well. An externality is when arises when a person is engaged in an activity that affects the well-being of a third party, not involved in the activity. We might consider these a spillover as well, but essentially a third party, someone or something else, has been impacted by someone's activity and they weren't meant to have been impacted. We might have negative externalities, and this occurs when a cost is imposed on a third party not involved. So this is negative because a third party has got a cost involved to them. Something negative has happened to them. For example, a negative externality of consumption of alcohol is that you are more likely to cause an accident to someone else. So a third party might be involved in an accident when they had nothing to do with the drinking of alcohol. A negative externality of production of mining raw materials is that it reduces the environmental quality of the people who live by it. So all the people living by a mine, not involved in the activity of mining, they will likely have the cost of reduced environmental quality because of the mining. Positive externalities, however, occur when a benefit is received by a third party, not involved in the activity. So this impact can sometimes be positive. For example, getting the COVID vaccine reduces the likelihood of passing the virus on to others. So others are going to have a positive benefit of you getting the COVID vaccine. And a positive externality of production is that opening a florist or a nice cafe is going to improve the desirability of the street and living standards of everyone around it, even though they're not involved in the cafe or the florist. So understanding that, and if you want to understand a little bit more, there is a YouTube video you can watch. I'll chuck that into the link in YouTube. But this concept is important because we're going to look at 4 reasons for market failure. Public goods, we're going to come back to externalities, asymmetric information, and common access resources. We need to understand how these result in market failures and also understand governments don't want market failures, so they will often do things to intervene into the market to fix the failure. And some of the things that they might do are indirect taxation, subsidies, have regulation, or advertising. And after each of our 4 market failures, we will explain them, and then we will go through what are some of the interventions governments do to address this market failure. Now, the first market failure is what we call public goods. Public goods are goods and services that produce positive externalities or benefits to society. That's why we need to understand externalities first. Public goods have 2 characteristics though, and this is where there's a few technical terms to understand. Public goods are non-excludable. The supplier of the public good cannot stop a person from consuming it, even if someone has not paid for it. So people can consume this good even if they don't pay. And it's also non-rivalous or non-depletable. The consumption of the product by one person does not prevent another from consuming it. So it doesn't get depleted, but probably more important, you can't exclude people from using it even if they don't pay. So examples of public goods are police and roads. Many people, how are these paid for? They are paid for by taxes. But not everyone pays taxes, and someone using a road does not prevent others from using it. So they're quite unique goods. Now, private goods, on the other hand, are rigorous. Someone consuming it will prevent someone else from consuming it. It's depletable, and probably important, but not in the slide, it is excludable. The supplier will not give it to someone unless they pay. So here are your examples, your police or roads. Now, why is there market failure for public goods? It all comes down to this concept of the free rider problem. This free rider problem occurs because they are non-excludable. You can use them without paying. Since we know we can consume these public goods without paying them, as long as someone else pays for them, there is the temptation for people to not pay for them, and actually there is no incentive, so no one actually ends up deliberately paying for them. People are not going out paying for roads consciously or the police, because you don't need to. This results in a market failure, as a product that would optimally be supplied to society is actually not supplied. There is no incentive for roads or police to be supplied by private businesses. Why would a supplier produce a product that people don't have to pay for? For example, the Defence, Army, Navy, Air Force, all citizens have an expectation of defence, but either don't want or don't have the capacity to actually pay for it. If you think about it, we do not pay deliberately or consciously for an army. This leads to, if we don't intervene, an under-allocation of resources to the Defence Force, leading to an inefficient allocation of resources. Because I think we all agree there needs to be some type of defence of the nations. So what does a government do? How do they intervene? How do they fix this market failure where things that we need are non-excludable, so no one needs to pay for them? So if we didn't intervene, we would never have them because no one would produce them. The public goods and services that are in the nation's best interests but unlikely to produce are provided directly by the government. The government will intervene in those markets where benefits associated with public goods exceed the amount provided by the free market. So if roads and the army are not being created by private businesses, which they are not, the government will intervene. The government has two options to intervene. They can do direct government provision, which is one they often do. They will get taxes, collect taxes, and use that taxes to pay for them. So they use revenue from taxes to buy those public goods. So they fund defences, prisons, lighthouses, schools and hospitals because we know we need them and they're not being created by the free market. They also might, however, provide subsidies to private businesses in the form of a direct cash payment or maybe a low interest loan or a grant to reduce the cost to the public. So they might give subsidies to make them more profitable for businesses and incentivize them to do it. For example, the production and installation of street lights is subsidized by cash payments by the government. The second reason for market failure is we come back to the topic of externalities. And we know that an externality arises when a person is engaged with an activity that affects the well-being of a third party not involved in the activity. So someone is impacted who didn't expect to be impacted. There is a spillover. And negative externalities occur when a cost is imposed on a third party. and positive externalities occur when a benefit is received by the third party. Buyers and sellers in markets tend to neglect the impact of these externalities because they're not impacting them themselves. And they tend to neglect these impacts when making decisions about production, how much to supply, how much is demanded. This leads to market failure as the outcome will not always be in the best interest of society because we're not thinking about the impact on third parties, whether they are positive or negative. Now, economists try to consider the concept of social costs, so to take into account not just the private costs, but social costs as well when considering outcomes. So they try to consider externalities when trying to work out how much should be produced of particular goods and services. So a social cost is the concept of a cost borne by a country that are non-economic in nature. So these might be things like depletions of natural resources, social unrest, costs borne by the country, negative impacts that are really non-economic. And also consider social benefits, the benefits enjoyed by the country that are non-economic, such as education and social harmony, which might not give you heaps of profit and money or revenue, but we recognize have great benefits. So when we don't consider these social costs and benefits in our decisions, these leads to them being ignored and not taken into account, and we have inefficient production of goods or services, and economists think we should consider them. So when there are externalities present in the market, it results in market failure as there is a non-optimal allocation of resources and production that is not considered in the decision-making process. We're not considering them. So if we have lots of positive externalities, so benefits that aren't being considered, we're going to do underproduction because we're ignoring some of the benefit. So if the benefits are being ignored, we're going to produce less than what we actually should because we're ignoring the benefits. Maybe more accurate or more common, if we ignore negative externalities, we might do overproduction because we are ignoring some of the social costs of the production. And here is a good graphical representation of this that I won't explain because we have done it, but I recommend pausing the video and having a good look at this to understand it. So what are some of the reasons for market failure because of positive externalities? Positive externality in production occurs when a firm produces a good or service that produces benefits to someone else. Now, some of these positive externalities are things like research and development. This can result in new technology that can benefit others. So businesses in production doing research and development, there is a benefit to others because the new technology that they create can benefit others. Training will benefit other parties because if employees leave and take their skills to other businesses benefit. And some businesses will improve the amenity of the community and make it more desirable. So if you, for example, build a florist or a cafe, we talked about them previously, there is going to be a benefit to lots of other businesses and communities. We might even create complementary businesses. Now, positive externality in consumption occurs when the consumption of a good or service improves the well-being. So you can see we're splitting up externalities into the production process or the consumption. Thinking about suppliers, thinking about consumers. So for example, vaccination and education improve everyone else's, other third parties, either due to herd immunity due to vaccinations. Education will improve productivity, overall health, and actually might get other people employed, because more educated people create jobs for other people. Now, the government want to increase these positive externalities. And if we think about it, positive externalities means there will be a underproduction. We're not doing these enough. So governments need to want to intervene to promote these activities. So governments might subsidise these activities to create external benefits. So governments subsidise education, as this will lead to private benefits and add to the likelihood of more productive capacity. They might do research grants to encourage training and research and development. And these things will hopefully increase the supply and the demand for these products and shift curves to the right. And here we go. Here is an example of this. In this case, we are talking about a product. And if we can see that the government increases the supply of the good by, in this case, doing a grant and tax concessions, this will increase the amount of quantity traded. It will decrease the price, and this will ultimately result in an improvement of the issue, that of underproduction. So originally, this amount was being produced, Q1 I'll call that. We recognise that there are some positive externalities because of this activity that we want to encourage. It's not being taken into account. The government intervenes and increases the supply by taxes, leading to a new equilibrium state, Q2, and this has increased the amount traded of that good. And in this case, there's also the benefit that the price has gone down, which is probably also beneficial. So the government intervenes. How do we sometimes do this to increase? They might do advertising. We've talked about that. This is, we might use regulation to increase the demand, so make education compulsory, and this will increase demand to the right. Here is the example. So previously we were talking about supply. How can they intervene to increase the supply? Government can also intervene to increase the demand by laws and advertising. Again, you'll see here supply hasn't changed, but we have gone from D1 to D2. The equilibrium has changed from Q1 to Q2, leading to an increase in the quantity traded. The slight difference here, this being here, the price has increased. Now, negative externalities are as a result of us ignoring third-party costs. So we are doing overproduction. We are ignoring some costs to others. So a negative externality in production occurs when a firm produces a good or service that imposes a cost on society or another economic agent. And these negative things that aren't considered might include degradation of the natural environment or pollution, the use of finite raw materials, or decreasing the amenity of the community. So these are negative costs, negative impacts that might be ignored in the production process. A negative impact in consumption occurs when the consumption of a good imposes a cost. And this might be in consuming it, we are having noise pollution, use of tobacco or alcohol has a lot of negative costs on society, and other undesirable consumption like gambling has negative impacts to society which aren't taken into account. So how do we intervene as a government to reduce negative externalities, to reduce the production of goods and services that create negative outcomes? Governments will often create regulations to forbid certain activities. For example, smoking in an enclosed environment has been banned because of the negative impacts to others. They might do indirect taxation, so we might tax the producers or consumers of these goods or services. So there is high taxes on tobacco or alcohol. There previously was a carbon tax on pollution. And this leads to higher prices and decreased demand. So for example, the excise on petrol is approximately 40 cents per litre. We know that it harms the environment, the use of petrol, the use of cars. So to reduce it, we have put a tax on it. Cigarettes have negative externalities, so their price is increasing by 12% per year. To do this, this might result in a reduction in supply. So if we think about an indirect tax on suppliers who are producing goods that are undesirable, if the government intervenes and does a tax, there is going to be a shift in the supply. So previously the equilibrium would have been here at Q1. The tax has increased the cost of production because there is a reduced profit for each production. A shift in the supply, will lead to Q2, leading to a new equilibrium state here, and a reduction in the quantity traded and an increase in price. The government has intervened via taxes to reduce the quantity traded and increase the price. In a sense, reducing something that we were originally overproducing. Advertising and education are great ways to reduce the demand for these products. This also might be applied to demerit goods, and this occurs when types of goods or service that tend to be overconsumed because the consumer has incomplete information. So advertising and education may be used to influence the taste and preferences of consumers with the aim of reducing the consumption of goods and services with high negative externalities, high negative impacts on third parties. So there has been significant campaigns, for example, in Australia to reduce smoking, consumption of alcohol, dangerous driving, those sorts of things. Why do we do this? To reduce the demand for it. So in this case, we have gone from D1 to D2. The original quantity traded or equilibrium occurred at Q1 with a price P1. And there has been a new demand curve leading to a new quantity traded and equilibrium state. And there has been a reduction in the quantity traded. We have reduced the demand, in this case by advertising and education, and this has reduced the quantity demanded, the quantity traded, leading to, in this case, the good outcome of less of this good being traded, and this has addressed the overproduction because negative externalities were not taken into account. The third reason for market failure, and I appreciate this is a long video, is asymmetric information. A key assumption of perfectly competitive markets is that all producers and consumers have perfect or full information. They know, everyone knows the same amount of information. They need perfect information to make rational decisions that efficiently allocate resources. Now, asymmetric information are situations which occur commonly where one party in a transaction has more or superior information compared to others. Now, if this is the case, it's not going to be a fair negotiation. Someone has more power, and this is not something that we want. This often can happen where the seller knows more than the buyer. For example, a mechanic potentially might lie to the buyer to increase the amount that needs to be paid. Although the reverse can also happen, for example, in healthcare, where the buyer knows more about their personal health than the business trying to sell insurance to them. Now, asymmetric information can lead to market failure due to a number of reasons. The first one being adverse selection. An uninformed economic agent, so someone in the economy, can make an adverse or negative purchase decision because they have got not the fair amount of perfect information. Buying second-hand cars, for example, without all the correct information might mean they buy a bad second-hand car. The other reason why it might lead to a market failure is due to moral hazard. Economic agents might adjust their behaviour to one that is less efficient or favourable from society's point of view, as they realise if they have more information than someone else, they might transfer losses to someone else. For example, the mechanic is not going to be giving the society benefit by lying about how much the issues are with the car, but they're going to transfer the loss or the negative impact to someone else and profit themselves. What are some examples, specific ones? What are some examples, and we've touched on a couple, where the seller has more perfect information than the buyer? We might have a mechanic or a second-hand car dealership. Consumers may decide to not purchase second-hand cars because they become risk-averse, leading to overproduction of new cars and increased waste. So if the seller has more information than the buyer, and consumers realise that, they might decide that they are not going to get their cars fixed or buy second-hand cars because they're worried they're going to be ripped off. This can lead to overproduction of new cars and more waste because mechanics and second-hand dealerships potentially are taking advantage of non-perfect information. Other examples are pet food. For example, the seller does not have the perfect information about what is in pet food, and we don't necessarily know what is in all of our health products. And if that's not the case, we might make bad decisions. What are some examples where the buyer has more perfect information than the seller? Insurance. A consumer knows how healthy their lifestyle is and may not provide this information to the health insurer. They might lie about how much they drink or smoke or any previous health issues. Now, the reason why this is not desirable is this increases the insurance premiums on everyone and actually might lead to some people not getting private health insurance because the premiums have gone up too much. Other examples, a common one is people often lie on their resumes. So how can we as a government intervene to protect consumers? Often what they do via government regulation. The government has a number of government regulation or laws to protect consumers who don't have full information, or to ensure that they do have full information or are not taken advantage of because they don't. A number of these laws include the Trade Practices Act and Australian Consumer Law. The Australian government can also apply advertising to run campaigns to fill gaps in information, or subsidise those providing information to consumers. So give money to documentary makers or organisations that are trying to bridge that information gap. The government will also try and do a number of other things like Australian Consumer Competition Commission to promote competition among the sellers so they are not going to try and take advantage of people. And I'll let you read that slide. The final, and this is a long video, reason for market failure that we discuss is common access resources. A common access resource are resources that are not owned by anyone. Usually they don't even have a market price and are therefore available to anyone even if they have not paid for them. So there are some similarities to public goods, but the key here is everyone has them. There's no market price. You do not have to pay for them. Everyone has common access to the resource. So what are some of the characteristics of this? It is non-excludable. The supplier, even if there is a supplier, cannot stop a person from consuming it. But one key bit here that is different to public good is that it is rigorous or depletable. The consumption of the product by one prevents another from consuming it. So the issue here is these are resources that everyone has access to. You can't stop people using them, but the consumption of it by one person prevents others from using it. So it is used up. What are some examples of common access resources? Our forests. There is not necessarily a price on our forests. People can consume them, but once someone uses a tree, that prevents someone else from using it. The fish or the resources in our oceans. Everyone can use them. People can consume them without paying a price for them. But once the resource is used up, it's not coming back. Air, our rivers, our natural environment are other common access resources. So why is this a market failure? It comes down to this cartoon here. If these idiots would just take the bus, I could be home by now. The problem with the common access resources is what we call the tragedy of the commons. And for those that have never heard of this or don't know what a common is, this is a representation of a common, which I'll explain in a second. The lack of excludability and absence of prices naturally leads to excessive consumption of these goods. Everyone has access to them, they give them a benefit, they're free, everyone uses them up. Everyone drives on the roads. The negative externality is if everyone is using them up and they're depletable, we are putting a negative social cost on future users because we are using up a valuable resource that is finite. Now, the tragedy of the commons talks about in medieval time how farmers would farm their cattle and sheep and livestock. Many would have their own pastures, which they own the land. But there would also be what we would call an area of commons. Because land was plentiful, there would be an area, let's say this bit here, that would be free for all farmers to use. But what would happen is every farmer would take their livestock there. It was free. They didn't have to maintain it. There was no incentive to maintain it because others weren't doing it. So each time the commons were used, they weren't looked after, they weren't respected, and the resource was depleted for future users. So what are some of the government intervention on commerce access resources? It often comes down to the regulation, so putting some rules around it. So for example, there are fishing laws. There are restrictions on duck hunting. We have Parks Victoria that puts restrictions on what can be used in our environment. And one that was particularly effective for a while was the carbon tax was in effect for a number of years to try and punish businesses that were producing polluting the air, putting too much carbon in, but they weren't feeling the impact for that. And you're welcome to have a read of this slide. Now guys, that has been a long video, and I feel like I've lost my voice, and we've skimmed a little bit of it. But I hope that gives you an understanding of reasons for market failure, how governments intervene to help them or address these, and it's quite a complicated one that I recommend that you have hopefully not watched in full, but have split it up to understand the 4 ways of market failure: public goods, externalities, common access resources, asymmetric information, and importantly, you've looked at ways how governments can address them so that we are not having too many social costs that are leading to overproduction and not having too many social benefits that aren't being recognised because we have underproduction. And that's how a government tries to intervene to ensure the efficient allocation of resources.